The black waitress didn't flinch during a robbery, and the Korean Mafia CEO, watching from the corner, recognized her voice instantly. A Thursday morning, South Side Chicago. The diner is the kind of place that has been open since 1987 and hasn't changed a thing about itself and is proud of it. Red aprons, chrome counter, booths with tape over the cracks. Michelle Grace is refilling the coffee station when the door opens too fast and a young man in a black ski mask enters holding a gun that doesn't know what it's doing. Everyone drops. The retired cop slides off his stool. The college student goes under the table. The delivery drivers hit the linoleum. Michelle Grace doesn't move. She stands behind the counter with her hands loose at her sides and her eyes on his face and spoke to him the way you speak to someone standing on a ledge, not with softness, not with fear, but with the particular gravity of a woman who has already decided how this ends. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for anything. She simply told him the truth, that the register had less than $200 in it, that he'd driven here on desperation and not a plan, and that the door behind him was still unlocked. She said it the way weather says things, without asking if he was ready to hear it. He stood there for 4 seconds that felt like geography. Then his arm dropped. He turned. He left. The sleet swallowed him before the door finished closing. In the corner booth, a man in a charcoal suit had already arisen. He placed 4 folded bills on the table, enough to cover 10 meals, and walked out without speaking to anyone. No acknowledgement, no lingering, just the precise departure of a man who had come for one thing and found something else entirely. Michelle wiped down the counter where the coffee had spilled. She refilled 2 abandoned mugs. She picked up her order pad. The footage appeared online at 6:19 that evening, shot from under table 4 by a customer whose hands were shaking badly enough that the frame bounced on every exhale. But Michelle was sharp in the center of it, unmistakable, hands at her sides, chin level, voice coming through the muffled audio like a blade through water. By the time Michelle came through her apartment door that night, it had 600,000 views. By morning, the number would stop meaning anything. Amara had the laptop open on the kitchen table. She turned the screen without a word. Her face was doing 2 things at once, the pride and the fear running alongside each other, like they'd decided not to fight about who got there first. Michelle watched the video once, 37 seconds. She closed the laptop. She took the leftover rice from the fridge and ate it standing at the counter, cold, 2 forks. She said, "That's enough of that." Amara didn't push. She'd learned, the way people learn things that matter, that some doors on Michelle Grace don't have handles on the outside. She closed her textbook and said nothing, and the apartment held the particular silence of 2 women who understood each other across the distance of what neither of them was saying. Michelle washed her fork. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed. The video kept climbing while she slept. The call came at 9:14 the next morning. Michelle was already dressed, keys in hand, jacket on, standing at the door with the particular readiness of someone who has never been late for anything in her life. Donna's voice arrived the way bad news always does, not in the words, but in the half second before them. That specific quality of silence that belongs to someone who has already made a decision and is now performing the discomfort of delivering it. The diner had been getting calls since 6 a.m. Journalists, she said, a blog, 2 local news stations asking for the woman in the video by name. Donna said she was sorry twice, which meant she wasn't, and explained that the kitchen had some things that couldn't survive a camera crew walking through, which Michelle understood to mean the kind of things that get businesses shut down and managers arrested. She wasn't being fired for the robbery. She was being fired because the robbery had made people look, and the diner had been built specifically so nobody would. Michelle said she understood. Donna said she was sorry one more time. Michelle hung up. She put the keys on the hook by the door. She took off her jacket. She went to the closet and removed her uniform, the white top with the red trim, the red apron, and folded them with the same precision she would have used if she were going back on Monday. She hung them on the inside closet door. She didn't need to. She just wasn't the kind of person who left things crumpled on a chair because the floor had fallen out. By 10:30, she had her laptop open at the kitchen table. By noon, she had submitted 11 applications: waitress, hostess, cafe counter, cashier, anything that paid weekly and didn't ask too many questions. She updated a resume she had been meaning to update for 8 months. She ate the leftover rice cold, standing, because sitting down in the middle of the day felt like something she hadn't earned. The fridge, when she opened it for the second time, said the same thing it had been saying for a week. 2 eggs pushed to the back, half a block of cheese going dry at the edges, a bottle of water, the particular kind of nothing that isn't quite empty enough to call an emergency. On the door, in her own handwriting on a yellow sticky note, Amara tuition, due Fry. And underneath it, face up, an invoice for $340 she already knew she didn't have. She turned it face down. She went back to the applications. Amara came home at 4. She came through the door with her backpack and a look she was trying not to have, and she set her keys down with the deliberate quiet of someone who had been thinking on the train ride home about how to ask a question she already knew the answer to. How was work? Michelle didn't look up from the table. Fine. The look they exchanged lasted less than 2 seconds and said everything the apartment wasn't big enough to hold. Amara was 20 years old and the smartest person Michelle knew, and understood in the way that people understand things they were never supposed to have to learn, that some silences were not about the thing they appeared to be about. She went to her room. She closed the door softly. Michelle sat at the kitchen table until midnight. One lamp on, the invoice still face down, the applications sent, unanswered, out in the dark somewhere, waiting on people who would not call until they were ready. She sat with her hands flat on the table and did not cry, because she had decided a long time ago that the night was not the place for that, and the decision had held this long, and she saw no reason to renegotiate it now. The knock came on a Saturday afternoon, 2 days after the firing. Michelle was at the kitchen table with a newspaper she'd picked up from the laundromat because her laptop had died that morning, and she hadn't decided yet whether fixing it counted as a necessity or a luxury she couldn't justify. She was still in the clothes she'd supped in. Her hair was pulled back. She had eaten half a piece of toast for breakfast and was pretending she wasn't thinking about the other half. She opened the door and knew immediately. The suit was the first thing. Dark, fitted with the kind of precision that doesn't happen at a department store, the kind that requires someone to measure you twice and charge you for the patience. Then the shoes, black and polished in a way that was almost architectural. Then, visible through the stairwell window at the end of the hall, the car, long and dark, parked at the curb with a driver behind tinted glass, idling with the quiet confidence of a vehicle that has never been told to hurry. The man wearing the suit was Korean, late 20s, with a stillness about him that had nothing to do with patience and everything to do with a specific kind of discipline, the kind you build deliberately after learning what happens when you don't have it. He was looking at her the way people look at something they have been searching for, not with surprise, with confirmation. "I'm not interested," Michelle said. "I haven't said anything yet. I can see the suit and the car." She held the door at 6 inches. "That's enough." He didn't step forward. He didn't put his hand out to stop the door. He simply stood in the hallway and let her finish, the way someone stands in the rain without flinching, not because they don't feel it, but because they've decided the rain doesn't get a vote. His name was Kim Ji-hwan. He owned a restaurant in Midtown called Hanul. Legitimate, he said. Clean. The kind of operation that didn't need to hide from a camera crew. He needed a floor manager. Someone with experience, he said. But that wasn't actually what he said. What he said was, "I need someone who doesn't break." He told her the salary. She kept her face exactly where she'd put it. It was 3 times what the diner had paid. "I don't know you," Michelle said. I don't know what you actually want, and I don't take jobs from men I don't know because every opportunity I've ever been offered by a man in a good suit came with a cost I didn't agree to up front. She said it without heat, without performance, the flat and final tone of a woman who had learned this lesson in a way that left marks. Whatever you saw on that video, whatever you think you know about me, it doesn't give you a claim. Something moved through his expression, not offense, something quieter, the look of a man absorbing impact he had anticipated and is absorbing anyway because he decided before he knocked that he would. He reached into his jacket and produced a card, plain white, a name, a number, nothing else. He held it out through the gap in the door, and when she didn't take it, he bent and placed it on the floor in front of her threshold, with the same composure he'd have used setting it on a boardroom table. "If you change your mind," he said. He turned and walked back down the hallway, and his footsteps were the most unhurried thing she had heard in recent memory, the walk of a man who trusted, without arrogance, that time was not working against him. She closed the door. She locked it. She did not pick up the card. She looked at it for 2 days. The invoice came due on Friday. Her account sat at the kind of balance that has 7 cents in it and means something precise and humiliating about where things stand. None of the 11 applications had called. The eggs were gone. Amara had a study group Saturday morning and had left early, smiling in the careful way she smiled when she was protecting Michelle from her own awareness of the situation. At 11:47 p.m., Michelle walked to the front door. She picked up the card. She looked at the name for a long time. Then she dialed. It rang once. "I'm calling about the job. Just the job. Nothing else." "Just the job," he said. She hung up without saying goodbye. She put the card in the kitchen drawer. She went to bed, and somewhere across the city, in an office on a high floor with the Chicago skyline spread out below like a problem already solved, Kim Ji-hwan set his phone down on the desk and exhaled, slowly, completely, for 2 days. Hanul sat on the second floor of a building in Midtown that gave nothing away from the street. Inside, it was all dark wood and clean lines and lighting calibrated to make every table feel like a private conversation. The menu was Korean. The clientele arrived in cars that idled at the curb. The staff moved with the particular efficiency of people who had been trained to be invisible and had decided to take pride in it. Michelle started on a Monday. She arrived 12 minutes early, tied her apron, and spent the first 40 minutes walking the floor without a single table assigned to her, just moving through it, counting, mapping, committing the 42 tables to a part of her memory that didn't require thinking. By her second hour, she knew every server's name and which sections ran slow on a full house. By the end of her first shift, she had identified the 2 most common failure points in the reservation handoff and fixed one of them without being asked. By the end of her first week, the floor supervisor had stopped following her sections. By the end of her second, the kitchen had begun sending her advance word when a dish was running behind, not because anyone told them to, but because someone back there had noticed that Michelle Grace always knew before anyone complained, and it was easier to tell her than to deal with the aftermath of not telling her. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Not because she loved it, but because she refused to be mediocre at anything that kept Amara fed. The glass office was on the 3rd floor. From it, you could see the entire dining room below, every section, every table, every interaction from above, like a map of something living. Gi-won used it 2 or 3 nights a week. His staff assumed he came for business. There was always business, but on the nights he came, he spent more time at the glass than at his desk, and the papers in front of him moved less than they should have. Michelle knew he was up there. She had known from the 2nd week. She did not adjust for it. Not her posture, not her pace, not the particular economy of movement she brought to a full floor on a Saturday night. She gave him the same professional precision she gave the dishwasher and the sommelier and the couple at table 7 who couldn't decide. If he was watching, he was welcome to watch her work. There was nothing else on offer. The reservation incident happened on a Friday in her 4th week. A double booking, 2 parties, same table, same time, arriving simultaneously while the hostess stood between them, performing a kind of paralysis. The floor supervisor was sweating through his collar. Giwan came down from the third floor and began rearranging the seating chart himself, moving names with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to having his decisions executed without discussion. Michelle was passing with a full tray. "That won't work," she said. She didn't stop walking. She said it the way she said everything, level, direct, without the softening that people usually apply when correcting someone who owns the building. She nodded at the chart without looking at him. Table 11 had a party of 6 who always took 20 minutes longer than their reservation. Move the second booking to table 20, run them parallel, neither table would know the difference. The room held its breath. 3 seconds passed. Giwan looked at the chart. He moved the booking to table 20. He said nothing. He walked back toward the stairs. Michelle delivered her tray. The floor supervisor wiped his forehead. The hostess sat down like her legs had made a unilateral decision. Across the dining room, 2 servers exchanged a look that meant they had just witnessed something they would be discussing for the rest of the month. In his office, above the floor, Giwan sat down at his desk. The papers in front of him didn't move for a long time. It started with the coffee. A Wednesday, 3 weeks in. Michelle was closing, flipping chairs, running the checklist the floor supervisor left on a clipboard by the service station, moving through the empty restaurant with the quiet efficiency of someone who finds a kind of peace in the end of things. The kitchen was dark. The last server had clocked out 20 minutes ago. She had assumed she was alone until she heard the particular creak of the third-floor office chair, and then footsteps on the stairs, and then Giwan came around the corner carrying 2 cups. He set one on the table she had just cleaned. He sat down across from it without asking if she wanted company. The coffee was black with 1 sugar. She had not told him this. She had made it for herself 3 times in the break room over the past 2 weeks, and apparently that was enough. She looked at the cup for a moment. Then she sat down. They stayed for 25 minutes. Michelle told him about a table from earlier in the evening, a couple who had sent the same dish back twice, then left 40% and a handwritten note apologizing for the trouble. She told it without editorializing, the way she told most things, just the facts assembled in order. But somewhere in the middle of it, something happened to her voice. It lifted slightly at the end of a sentence. It was not quite a laugh. It was the shape a laugh makes before a person decides whether to let it out. Giwan listened the way he did everything, completely, like whatever she was saying had his full attention and would continue to have it for as long as she chose to speak. He didn't fill the pauses, he didn't redirect, he just listened, and when she finished, he said something quiet and dry that made the almost laugh happen again, closer to the surface this time. She finished her coffee. She went back to the checklist. The second Wednesday, he didn't bring coffee. He came downstairs with his laptop and settled at the bar and opened it and worked, and Michelle moved through her closing routine, and neither of them spoke for 30 minutes. It should have been strange. A man who owned the building sitting at his own bar in silence while an employee finished her shift. It was not strange. It was the most comfortable 30 minutes she had spent in recent memory. And she noticed that too and filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things she wasn't ready to examine. The third Wednesday, she noticed his arm. He was reaching for his cup when his sleeve pulled back and she saw it. A bruise running across his forearm in deep purple fading to yellow at the edges. The specific coloring of something that had been absorbing impact for several days. Not the kind that comes from a door frame or a cabinet. The kind that comes from the sort of business that doesn't appear in any public filing. Michelle did not stop wiping the table she was wiping. "Ice that tonight. It'll swell worse by morning." He pulled his sleeve down. "It's fine." "It isn't." She said it the way she said everything. Flat, factual, the tone of someone conveying information rather than feeling, as though caring about the state of his arm was simply a practical matter and not something that cost her to say. But on the train home, coat still on, hands in her lap, the city moving dark outside the window, she felt it. A warmth in her chest, low and slow and entirely unwelcome. She recognized it with the precision of someone who has felt it before and knows exactly what it becomes if you don't address it immediately. The first thread, thin enough to seem harmless, the kind that if she let it, would weave itself into something she couldn't remove without taking a piece of herself with it. She sat with it for 2 stops. Then she looked out the window and told herself it was nothing.
She had been telling herself that about things like this for years. She was very good at it. She was less certain this time that it was working. 5 years ago, Kim Gi-won was 24 years old and sitting in a Chicago diner at 2 a.m. with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched and no particular plan for the morning. The company he had spent 3 years building, a logistics platform, lean and precise, the first thing he had ever made that felt like proof of something, had been dismantled in a single week by the man who had funded it, his mentor, the person who had flown to Seoul specifically to find him, who had told him he was exceptional, who had structured the partnership in a way that Gi-won, 21 and hungry, and not yet fluent in the particular dialect of men who take things, had not understood until it was too late. The fraud charges were real. They were also not his. The distinction would eventually be proven, but eventually was a long way from 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in a city he had moved to for a future that no longer existed. His visa had 11 days left on it. His reputation had less. He was not thinking about bridges. He was thinking about something quieter and more final. The specific appeal of becoming so small that the catastrophe consuming him would find nothing left worth taking. He was thinking about disappearing. Not dramatically, just gradually. Just enough. The diner had been open when he walked past it, and he had gone in because the light was on and he needed somewhere to be that wasn't his motel room. He had been sitting in the corner booth for 40 minutes when the door opened. She came in from the cold with a backpack over one shoulder and her natural hair loose around her face and a library sweatshirt that had the name of a school he didn't recognize across the chest. She was young, early 20s, maybe younger. She had the particular quality of someone who moves through the world as though she belongs in whatever room she enters, not through confidence exactly, but through a complete absence of apology. She walked to his booth and sat down across from him without asking if the seat was taken, with the ease of someone for whom the seat was simply available and therefore hers. He looked up. He had been expecting the waitress. She looked at him for a moment, directly, without the sideways quality that people use when they don't want to be caught looking, and then she said, in the most ordinary voice, as though she were observing the weather, "You look like someone who forgot that tonight is not the whole story." He didn't answer. She didn't wait for one. She talked. Small things. A paper she was behind on, a professor who assigned readings he clearly hadn't done himself, a song she'd heard on the walk over that had been running through her head for 3 blocks. She talked the way people talk when they understand that the point is not the content, but the fact of a human voice filling a room where silence had gotten too heavy. She ordered him a refill when the waitress came around and paid for it with a bill she pulled from the front pocket of her backpack, crumpled in the way of money that has been there a while and is spent anyway. At some point, she asked him one question. Not what happened, not what was wrong. She leaned forward slightly with her elbows on the table and said, "What would you build if you weren't afraid it would be taken?" He didn't answer. The question moved into his chest and stayed there, lodged somewhere between his ribs, and he felt it the way you feel something that has found the exact place it was always meant to go. She stayed for 40 minutes. When she left, she zipped her backpack with the same unhurried ease she'd arrived with, and she said, "Get home and get some sleep. The morning is different." Then she walked out into the Chicago dark without looking back, and she was gone before he fully understood that he hadn't asked her name. He went back to his motel. He slept, the first real sleep in a week. He woke up and the question was still there, sitting in his chest where she'd placed it. He made 3 phone calls. He started over. He built carefully, and then he built large, and then he built in a way that made him untouchable. Every alliance, every calculated risk, every precise and ruthless decision that turned a collapsed visa-expiring 24-year-old into the man who now sat in glass offices above restaurant floors. all of it, the entire architecture of the life he had constructed, began the morning after a stranger with a crumpled dollar and a library sweatshirt asked him what he would make if he stopped being afraid. He never got her name. He carried her voice for 5 years like something he wasn't ready to put down. And now, sitting in the back of a car outside a South Side diner with sleet on the roof and the footage still open on his phone, Michelle Grace, hands at her sides, chin level, voice coming through the audio like something that had always known exactly what it was doing. He had no longer carrying it. He had found her.
The buzzer went at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. Amara got to it first. Michelle heard her sister's voice through the intercom, controlled, careful, with that particular tightness that belongs to someone trying to sound older than they are. "She doesn't want to see you, Marcus." A pause. Then the door buzzed open anyway because the lock on this building had been broken for 6 weeks and the landlord had been notified 4 times. And some things you cannot control, no matter how precisely you manage everything else. Michelle came around the kitchen corner and her body stopped before she did. Not a decision, not a choice, a full system shutdown. Feet, hands, breath, all of it arrested mid-motion by something older and faster than thought. Her nervous system remembered him before her mind had finished registering who was standing in her hallway, and it responded the way it had learned to respond across 3 years of a very specific kind of weather, by going completely still. Marcus was tall and easy in the way of men who have never needed to take up space, because space has always arranged itself around them. He was wearing the smile, the particular one that arrived at the front of every conversation like a credential, warm and practiced, and carrying just underneath it the faint implication that you were lucky to be on the receiving end. He looked around the apartment the way he always looked at things she owned, with the unhurried assessments of a man calculating the distance between where she was and where, in his estimation, she ought to be. He talked. She didn't. This was not a strategy. Her voice was simply not available to her in the way that a room is unavailable when someone has changed the locks and kept the key. He talked about the video. He'd seen it. Everyone had seen it. She was something else. She always had been. He talked about how she looked. He talked about the apartment in the particular tone that isn't quite criticism, the tone that lands like a hand on a bruise and then lifts before you can name it as pressure. She stood in her own kitchen in her own apartment and offered him nothing because there was nothing she could find to give. He left after 5 minutes. On his way out, he brushed her arm. Barely contact, the graze of a hand that didn't need to grip to communicate what it meant. She flinched. Not a small flinch, a full-body recoil, involuntary and complete. And Amara, who was standing in the hallway behind her, made a sound that Michelle would spend a long time trying to unhear. Something young and fractured, the sound of a person watching something they had hoped they would never have to see. The door closed. Michelle stood in her kitchen. She didn't move toward anything. She didn't reach for her phone or the counter or the back of a chair. She stood in the middle of the room with the particular stillness of someone using every resource they have to remain vertical, and she said nothing for a very long time. She didn't hear Amara open the kitchen drawer, didn't hear her moving through the takeout menus, the spare batteries, the things that accumulate in the drawer that holds everything without a category. Didn't know until later that Amara had found the business card she'd slid to the back and thought she'd hidden well enough, and had dialed the number on the restaurant's main line with the straight-back decisiveness of a 20-year-old who loves her sister more than she is afraid of overstepping. Giwan knocked once, 19 minutes later, and Amara let him in. He came through the door without a car, without anyone with him, in the same jacket he'd been wearing when she called, which meant he had left wherever he was the moment the phone rang. Michelle was at the kitchen table, hands flat on the surface, back straight, her face arranged into composure with the thoroughness of a woman who had been composing her face since she was 19 years old. He saw the tremor in her left hand, the jaw clenched so precisely that the muscle at the corner flickered, the eyes fixed on a point on the wall that did not exist. "Don't," she said.
Her voice was steady and furious. "Don't look at me like that. I didn't call you. Amara called you. I don't need you here." He didn't argue. He didn't move toward her or away from her or offer her anything she hadn't asked for. "I'll be in the hall," he said. He went out. He descended one floor and sat on the staircase with his back against the wall and his forearms on his knees, and he stayed there for an hour because she hadn't asked him to leave and she hadn't asked him to stay. And in the space between those two things, he understood that staying within reach without making himself a weight was the only thing he had to offer her that was actually worth anything. She didn't come out. He hadn't expected her to. When he finally stood and walked down to the street, he looked up at her window. The light was on. He could not see her. He walked to the corner and turned and was gone, and Michelle, sitting in the dark on the other side of the glass, watched him until she couldn't anymore. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and breathed, in and out, slow and even, the way she had taught herself to breathe when the floor dropped out, steadily, deliberately, as though demonstrating to her own body that it was still capable of the most basic thing. It was. It always had been. That was the part Marcus had never managed to take.
She opened the door on the second knock. She had been expecting him since the first. 3 days away from Hanul, no call, no explanation. She knew he would come himself because that was the pattern she had identified in him by now. The particular way he closed distances that other men would have delegated. She was dressed. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was where she needed it to be. "I'm not coming back," she said. He waited. "I don't need a man in a suit deciding when I need help or how much or what kind. I've had that. I lived inside that for 3 years and I know exactly what it costs and what it looks like from every angle." Her hand was on the doorframe and her voice was level. The tone she used when the thing she was saying was not a feeling, but a perimeter. "Marcus didn't hit me. I want to be clear about that because people hear the word abuse and they want a specific kind of story. He just talked. For 3 years, he just talked, quietly, reasonably, in that particular voice until every opinion I had sounded wrong to me, and every boundary I drew seemed like evidence of some deficiency in my character. I packed a bag at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, and I walked out and I built everything again. The apartment, the job, the way I hold myself in a room. I built all of it back from nothing." She stopped, held the doorframe tighter. "And then he walked into my kitchen and I froze. 5 minutes. He touched my arm and I flinched in front of my sister. So no." Her voice didn't crack. It landed harder for staying whole. "I don't need another man standing in my hallway with that look on his face." "What look?" Kiwon said. "Like you can see me." The hallway held the silence. Then he spoke. Quietly, without mounting a defense, without asking her to receive it as anything other than what it was. "A diner, Chicago, 5 years ago, 2 a.m. A man with nothing, no company, no visa, no plan for the morning, sitting in a corner booth at the bottom of everything he had tried to build. And a young woman with a backpack who sat down across from him without asking permission and said in the most ordinary voice that tonight was not the whole story. She stayed 40 minutes. She asked him one question. She paid for his refill with a crumpled bill and told him the morning was different and walked out into the dark. He had nothing after that night, and then he built everything. Michelle stared at him. "I don't remember your face." "I know. I don't remember that night." "I know, but you remember the feeling." She did. It came back not as a scene, but as a sensation. A diner, late, the specific quality of a person folded into himself at a corner table, sitting at the very edge of a decision she had recognized without being able to name. She had gone in because something in the way he was positioned told her he needed one more reason. She hadn't known what she was doing. She had just followed the instinct, the way she always followed it, because it was the truest thing in her. The fight went out of her. Not lost. Set down, carefully, like something she could choose to pick back up and was choosing for now not to.
She stepped aside. Not all the way, just enough. He stepped in. She closed the door, and they sat at her kitchen table in the quiet apartment with the lamp on, and nothing between them except what was true. And for the first time in longer than she could easily calculate, Michelle Grace D did not feel the particular exhaustion of holding all walls in place alone. Amara's call came in at 2:17 p.m. Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was managing herself carefully, controlled, tight at the edges. The voice of a woman practicing composure she learned from watching her sister. Marcus had been at the East Gate for 40 minutes, not approaching, just standing there, just making himself visible, because that had always been enough. Michelle took off her apron. She folded it the way she always folded it, in thirds, clean corners, set on the break room counter as though she intended to come back for it. The same calm as the diner, not the absence of feeling, the presence of a decision already made, settled so completely into her bones that there was nothing left to negotiate with. She took the train. She found him 2 blocks from campus, leaning against his car with the particular ease of a man who has never once in his life felt the need to justify where he was standing. His smile arrived the moment he saw her, on schedule, warm. The one that had taken her 8 months to understand was not a greeting, but a posture. He opened his mouth. She spoke first. "You don't get to talk," the voice from the diner, not raised, not sharpened with anger, just final, the tone of something that has already happened and is simply being confirmed. "You came to my home. I let that go because I wasn't ready, but you do not exist near my sister. You don't stand outside her campus. You don't drive past her street. You do not occupy any space within reach of her life." She didn't move toward him. She didn't need to. "That is not a negotiation. It is the last thing I will ever say to you." Marcus's smile left in stages. He searched her face, the specific and practiced search she had watched him conduct 100 times, looking for the fracture, the particular place that had always given way under sustained pressure. He searched with the patience of a man who believed the crack was there because it had always been there. It wasn't there. Her face was a closed country with no roads in. He got in his car. He pulled away from the curb. He did not look back, and she watched until he was gone. And then the adrenaline arrived, a wave that started in her knees and climbed through her chest like weather, and she absorbed it standing upright, breathing slowly, the way she had taught herself to absorb things that tried to knock her sideways. She breathed. She turned around. Giwarn was across the street, hands in his jacket, back against the wall of a building, not walking toward her, not checking on her, not doing anything except being exactly where he was, visible, still, present in the specific way of a man who understood the difference between fighting for someone and being there when they win. He had not intervened. He had not tried to make himself part of what just happened. He had simply refused to let her be alone in it. She crossed the street. She stopped in front of him. She didn't say thank you. She didn't explain. "Do you want to get coffee?" The diner was 3 blocks away. Small, vinyl booths cracked at the seams, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency suggesting they had never been replaced. The coffee tasted like it had been made around noon and decided to stay. Michelle slid behind the counter by muscle memory, the way water finds a channel, and poured 2 cups without thinking about it and pushed one across to where Giwan had settled onto a stool. She kept one for herself. The sleet had started again outside, dragging itself across the glass. The lights hummed. Chicago moved past the windows the way Chicago always moved, loud, indifferent, entirely unconcerned with the small and enormous things happening inside a diner on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. She hadn't remembered his face from that night 5 years ago, but she remembered the feeling, the pull that said, "Sit down," the quiet interior voice that said, "Stay," the instinct that told her a person at the edge of something deserved 40 minutes of her time, even when she had nothing to spare. She had followed that instinct her whole life without knowing what it was. She knew now. It was the truest thing in her. Older than Marcus, older than loss, older than every wall she had ever built, and no one, not one person across every difficult year she had lived, had ever managed to take it. Giwan drank his coffee. Michelle drank hers. Outside, the city continued. Inside, it was just a counter and 2 cups, and the sound, quiet but unmistakable, of a story finally arriving at the place it had always been heading. If this story found something in you, if you felt every wall, every silence, every moment Michelle Grace stood her ground when the world tried to make her smaller, then don't let this be where it ends. Subscribe to this channel because we tell stories about people who carry quiet strength into impossible rooms, and we are just getting started. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the truest part of them is the part no one could take. And leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit hardest. We read every one. We'll see you in the next story.